Hey everybody, we're back from the break, and I just saw Robert Hershevek in the hallway getting mic'd up, ready for his segment. So make sure that you stay tuned for that coming next. Meanwhile, I just want to spend a couple of minutes speaking to you about some things that I think are important to all of us, both small and medium businesses throughout the region, throughout the entire country, and changes that I see coming down the road in 2024 and beyond. We talked about cyber insurance and the need to have that in the last segment, and we discussed the concept of recent that many businesses are actually being denied insurance coverage. And that's because now what's happening, because the ransomware events or incidents are so great and that the payout has been so immense for these insurance companies, that they're scrambling and they're trying to figure out ways to protect themselves. And so they're now starting to actually perform tests against your network and or just make requirements of certain controls that are in place for anybody who's interested in carrying a cyber insurance policy. And I highly recommend, as a business owner, that you do talk to your insurance provider and discuss what it would cost to have that, and the difference between having it and not having it can be really a matter of having a business or not in the end. And so with that, it's important to understand that the cybersecurity controls and the compliance regulations, set those aside, just mere survival in the way of doing business today, because technology is so intertwined in everything we do. And the fact is, all of your customer information, all of your employee information, and your personal information is somehow, somewhere wrapped into technology. And without some form of controls or eye on the ball, we don't even know, in many cases, what it is we're protecting, much less how to do so. So with that being said, I want to make sure that you're clear on the emphasis of your claim never being denied. If you have cyber insurance, it's important that you review that contract closely and that you make sure all the controls that are being required of you are accounted for and in place and set up the way that they need to be so that they continue to do their job. Look, this goes beyond the cyber insurance aspect for small and medium businesses. If you're doing business in Europe today, you're already familiar with GDPR. We have very similar privacy security frameworks in place in other states in this country already, and we have Homeland Security recently announcing the Cyber Performance Goals framework, which is a voluntary framework for all businesses that outlines ways that you should be protecting your business from a global threat of cybercrime, right? The threat is indeed real. I speak to business owners every day who didn't feel like this was something that pertained to them or that they needed to pay attention to, or thought they maybe had it covered in another way because they weren't aware of the different aspects in the changing landscape. They then get breached, and unfortunately at that point they understand very truly how real it is and the impact that it's going to have on their day-to-day lives going forward. Some of them will get through this, others will not, and they'll be gone. They'll need to potentially start a new business or go to work for somebody else just so that they can pay potential fines and different things that are going to come down on them as a result of that. On top of all those things, for all small to medium businesses, we have things like PCI, the payment card industry, which is an industry-based regulation for anybody who's taking credit card transactions in their business, right? Version 4.0 is being released in spring. So that's going to bring some new requirements, new updates that reflect today's newer technology, today's newer cyber criminal, today's newer threat landscape. We're also seeing NIST, the folks who made the cybersecurity framework to begin with, revisiting that entire framework for version 2. They're updating it to match today's security and today's needs, but in addition to that, they're adding yet another pillar of concentration to the cybersecurity framework called governance. And governance is basically the concept of the business or the organization making sure that things are working, verifying with evidence, having attestation of their employees that they have taken security awareness training or that they've done the required policy reading and understanding. I can go on and on and on all day. But the truth is, we're all impacted by cybersecurity and compliance. This is a part of our national security. It's a part of the supply chain. We may not be the biggest businesses, but we are indeed a part of that. And we're a channel up to the bigger vendors, to the bigger clients, upstream. We need to do things to protect ourselves. Changing regulations are not going to go away. Recently, we had the FTC Safeguards Rule that was updated, and it brought in all kinds of new changes that folks were not prepared for. And so I'm saying to you, please make sure that you're prepared for these things. The FTC Safeguards Rule are new requirements from the FTC. And what do they mean? And what do you have to do to protect yourself? First, let's just start with who is the FTC. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission, and they were created to protect consumers and competition by preventing anti-competitive and deceptive and unfair business practices through law enforcement, advocacy, and education without unduly burdening legitimate business activity. Back in 1929, we had the stock market crash, which kicked off the Great Depression. We all know that was a terrible time in our country, and in 1933, as a result, Congress passes the Glass-Steagall Act to update the financial regulation in hopes of stopping that from ever happening again. The unfortunate part is, from 1933 to 1999, we saw no real major changes to this regulation. This is a 66-year span and no major changes. In that time, right, as a country, we split the atom. We went to the moon. We invented personal computers and we created the internet. But in 1999, Congress passes the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, the GLBA. And here, they gave the FTC the responsibility of implementing this, hence the name the FTC Safeguards. The original rule was released May 23rd of 2002, and it then went into effect on May 23rd of 2003. So, we have November 12th, 1999, Congress passes the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which was meant to modernize the financial industry. It made the FTC responsible for implementation. Again, the original rule was released in 2002 and went into effect in 2003. And what did it do? Well, it applied some new controls on financial institutions. It put security protections in place and it put disclosure requirements. Those protections and disclosure requirements based on technology of the time. And unfortunately, this didn't solve the problem. Unfortunately, the GLBA was unclear. It also didn't have any teeth or enforcement, and as a result, we saw things like in 2008, the Heartland payment systems with 135 million credit cards exposed. 2013, we saw an Experian subsidiary leaking 200 million records. And then in 2019, the First American Financial Corporation, 885 million records leaked. We had a change recently to the FTC Safeguards Rule. And one of the biggest things that came as a result of the changes to this FTC Safeguard Rule were that we had an expanded definition of what a financial institution was. And that then made it so that many industries that were not previously regulated by the FTC safeguards are now part of that scope. So these changes dramatically changed the scope of the FTC Safeguards Rule. And I'll give you an industry example. For example, auto dealerships. These folks traditionally have the same level of consumer data as a bank, and they have a very high turnover rate with their employees. These employees are trained in sales and service of vehicles, not in cybersecurity. And in many cases, they're running on razor-thin margins, which gives them an incentive to skip on some of the security costs, which then makes them easy targets for hackers. And have you ever noticed the security controls that are in place when you buy a car? Now, with the new FTC Safeguards Rule, the technology landscape is radically different from 2002, and we saw this revision. Again, the biggest change was that expanded definition of financial institutions. Businesses and industries that weren't previously regulated are now being included in this group and therefore having to put in a full security plan and implement all the steps of FTC safeguards compliance. Examples of some of these covered entities are mortgage lenders and payday lenders, right? Finance companies and mortgage brokers, account servicers, check cashers, wire transferers, some travel agencies, real estate appraisers, credit counselors, and as I mentioned, automotive dealerships, tax preparation firms, non-federally insured credit unions, and some investment advisors. That's just to start. That's not all of them. And the list in the rule itself is not comprehensive, but it does list far and away more than it did in the previous, and the definition is far and away more expanded. So we know the who. Now we need to know what. What can we do to work with this, to protect ourselves, to be prepared for this FTC Safeguards Rule, to implement, to set up this new security program. So remember, the FTC safeguards were created to protect the security and then the confidentiality and most importantly, the integrity of our customer information. And they laid out a definition of what customer information is. It is as such. Customer information is any record that contains non-public information about a customer of a financial institution, whether it's on paper, whether it's in electronic form or any other format, handled or maintained on or behalf of you or your affiliates. Key things here are non-public personal information about a customer, things that are not publicly already available. This established parameters for the first time of good customer data hygiene. It also created punitive consequences for failing to adhere to these parameters. Companies that meet these new guidelines that are required to then start this road, this journey to compliance of the FTC Safeguards Rule, need to develop and implement and maintain that comprehensive information security program. And this thing needs to be written and readily accessible. It has to have well-defined controls based on your organization's size and your complexity and the risks that are involved. You need to explain the nature and the scope of the company's activities so that it's outlined what it is you're engaging in and how you're protecting those activities. You need to document customer information sensitivity. You need to document the various information sensitivities. Then, with this security program, your objectives are to ensure that your customer information is secured and confidential. You're looking to protect against any anticipated threats to the security or the integrity of that information. You're looking to protect against unauthorized access or use that could result in substantial harm or inconvenience to any customer. There are 9 elements to implementing the FTC Safeguards Rule. The first element is to designate a qualified individual to own the security program. The second element is to document a risk assessment of the organization. And then the third element is to apply controls based on the findings of that risk assessment. We then need to, as the fourth element, validate all of those controls and ensure that they are indeed fixing the security gap and doing what it is they're intended to do as they're intended to do it. We need to develop a security awareness training and auditing of that training program for our end users. We need to monitor our external vendors and service providers. Element number 7 is to develop a continuous improvement cadence, meaning it's not just do it once and we're finished. This is a culture change. We need to continuously be looking to improve our security posture. We need to document an incident response plan as element number 8. And then number 9 is to provide annual reporting to the senior leadership team and/or the board. This is specifically called out in the safeguards, all 9 of these elements. So let's start with that designate a qualified person as the security program owner. This person does not necessarily have to be part of the organization, and there is no official definition of qualified. However, this person or persons is going to be responsible for the compliance of the organization and making sure it's implemented properly. They will need to start by performing and documenting a full risk assessment. This risk assessment will help first by determining what is the risk criteria, what it is that we're protecting. We need to then see what controls we already have in place for the known risks that we have and see are they being effective and assess that. Then we need to go further and determine how any other risks that are not currently being controlled will be either mitigated or we need to accept them as an organization. And is that okay? And again, as I said, this is not one and done. Cybersecurity, I'll give you a cliche, it's not a destination, it's a journey. Compliance is a journey. And so you're going to need to do periodic assessments. They're just going to have to happen. Applying the controls based on our assessment findings, right? You need to apply controls, things like authorized access. Who has access to what data? We should be working with a least privilege type setup, where folks only get access to what they need to do their job and nothing more. We need to make sure we're encrypting customer information everywhere we can, at rest and in transit. We need to have folks use multi-factor authentication for logging into their systems and all other line of business applications. We need to create controls around data disposal, dead hard drives, retired equipment. And we need to put controls around change management and that process so that we make sure there's no rogue IT going on, no new projects coming into play without security being aware of it and analyzing if it's going to fit into the program or adjusting the program accordingly. And then we need to make sure that we're logging and monitoring all of these controls that we put in place so that we can A, make sure they're working, and B, prove that we have them. Evidence, very important. When it comes to controls, there's 3 types. We have the physical, the technical, and the administrative. Physical would be like a lock on a door. Technical might be a tool like an antivirus or a firewall. And administrative would be something like a policy or a procedure. Those are all different controls that can be applied against risks to help mitigate. Once those controls are applied, we then need to make sure to validate them. We need to test and monitor the control efficacy. We need to perform continuous monitoring against that. And we need to do pen tests on a regular basis and vulnerability scans. I would like to see vulnerability scans every 6 months, pen tests minimally once a year. Develop the training and then the auditing program of that training. We have to have security awareness training for our end users, and it needs to be an ongoing thing, not just once and then forget about it, because again, the threat landscape is changing. The technology continuously will change. We need to maintain sufficient staff to run our security program. And then we need to make sure that continuing education around security is a part of the culture in the organization. We need to start monitoring external vendors and service providers. We need to make sure we're engaging capable service providers and that their security safeguards are codified contractually both ways. We're doing what they need us to do, and they're doing what you need them to do. Perform periodic service assessment reviews against those folks. Then we need to develop a continuous improvement cadence. This will be reviewing risk assessments and then adjusting the controls accordingly when there's new systems or new processes or new tools in play. We need to reevaluate the security plan alongside those business changes. Make sure it's still up to date and it's matching everything the organization is involved in to mitigate all risks we can identify. Then we need to document an that incident response plan, right? And in there, we need to make sure that we're including the goals of the response and where we want to be when we're done. We want to make sure we lay out the internal processes that are going to need to take place during this period of time. And we have to have well-defined roles internally. Who's doing what, when, and where. This needs to be practiced. We need to do tabletop exercises where people can run through a drill and understand what their role is going to be in this incident response. We need to know what those communication channels are. Who do we call first and what is the number? Now remember, we've just had an incident. We don't know if our systems are even available, so don't look for email and don't look for a document digitally. These things need to be in place somewhere outside of the organization so you can get to it in the event of an incident. Folks, when this incident is occurring, you don't have time to think. You have to run through this, and this needs to be muscle memory. You need to know what your remediation requirements are. What is that important data to get me back in business? And you're going to need to know what are the reporting criteria if you're under a compliance framework or if there's state laws about breach notification. You're going to need to know what that criteria is and what the process is for reporting the incident. And then when it's all said and done and you're back, you need to debrief and then revise your response plan for the next incident. We then lastly need to provide annual reporting to that senior leadership team. And in those reports, we should include things like the security program's status, the risk assessment findings, and the controls that we've implemented against them. All the service providers or vendors that we've engaged and their status as far as security reviews. The testing results of our employees in their security awareness training. And any events that took place and the things that were mitigated, the things that were stopped, how it could have been better handled. The consequences of not implementing the FTC Safeguards Rule, if you're required to do so, can range in fines from $10,000 to $100,000 per violation. And there's wide regulatory discretion on that amount. Gross breaches can result in prison up to 5 years. And things like intentional abuse or selling or protected information. Handling it in a way that you're not supposed to knowingly. Intentional is the key there. These are enforced by the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So how is it enforced? Likely today reactive and not proactive, meaning they're not going to come knock on your door to see if you're up to speed, if you're where you need to be. But believe me, when an incident takes place, there will be an enforcement. There is going to be regulators putting you under a microscope, your entire organization, trying to understand if and what happened and where you might have been at fault, at which point you will then see the fines follow. This is typically how all of these types of compliances are enforced. We had an adoption date for the FTC Safeguards Rules of June 2023. That's come and gone. That's not important. If you fall under the requirements of this, you need to start on this journey today. Don't wait. This is a one day at a time opportunity. Start somewhere. Folks, there's a lot of moving parts in the compliance and the cybersecurity implementation phases for a small business who has not had to, prior to this, have a written information security program. This can be a daunting task for small business owners. And I can tell you that A, you are able to do this. You need to do it one step at a time. If you do feel like you need a partner in getting through these steps and getting you ready for your journey, we are here to help. WinStar Technologies can offer you Chief Security Officer services, and we can provide that designated qualified team who will then bring your organization through the steps, all 9 elements of the implementation of either the FTC safeguards and or any other compliance framework. Maybe it's just cyber insurance that you're looking to prepare for. We can show you the way and we can carry you through that. If you're needing help creating policies or procedures for your organization, we have compliance as a service offerings where we can sit down with the stakeholders in your organization and go over your current processes and design policies around those processes that will then help meet the controls and secure your organization. This is something that most businesses we encounter do not have in place today. And it's one of the biggest, most crucial steps towards achieving that cybersecurity compliance. My name is Dave Grood, and I am the President and Chief Security Officer of WinStar Technologies. And I am certainly glad that you spent the time that you did with me today and let me speak to you about these things that have been on my mind. Please remember, go to www.threatisreal.com and sign up for that initial consultation. Let's get on the phone and discuss your needs, where you want to be, where you are, and how we can help get you there. Until then, be safe and enjoy the next segment. Thank you.